Today, we're going to go through Dan Campbell's press conference for the Detroit Lions. He spoke to the media today, and there are some interesting things that I wrote down listening to the press conference, and of course, some interesting quotes that I have from all of our local beat writers that I'm going to be sharing with you guys, those who haven't seen it or those who've seen it, and I'm going to give my opinion on maybe what some of these quotes mean and how I interpreted it. So we're going to start off by showing his really one of the first things he got into in the press conference. And it was a good question. I forgot who asked the question, but it was basically, the turnaround of the Detroit Lions and how they've gotten to this point, right? With fixing the secondary and improving just the roster as a whole. And Dan Campbell had a really, really good answer, and he was dropping some bars. So here's Dan Campbell answering that question, and then I'll share my opinion on it.
Ground up, you have to do that. It's, you can't put a Band-Aid on something that needs stitches and expect it to just hold. So, and so we knew from that standpoint, it was not going to be the easiest thing. Now at the time you don't believe, you refuse to believe you can't win. You believe you can win, but you just know you got to have every little thing's got to be done right and has to go perfectly in your way. It's just got to be, and it doesn't always work that way. And so, but I do think it's important, and every team's going to have adversity. Every time you come into a new situation, it's going to happen. It's how you handle it. And then being able to believe in what you're doing and stay true to the process, right? That's the part where, you got to have the intestinal fortitude to hang in there and just keep doing what you believe in.
Yeah, and you heard the man, right? The process, the Detroit Lions process. And I think the biggest takeaway in there, at least for me, was the quote he had. You can't put a Band-Aid on something that needs stitches and just expect it to hold. And that's something that we've talked about here on this show, and something that I think fans are also aware of is we kind of look at a Marcus Davenport or, who they had last year at corner, more of a Band-Aid. And you kind of saw that play out. Like Cam Sutton, although he was a good player before he came to the Detroit Lions, but by the end of the season, it was essentially a Band-Aid. I mean, that's what they had in the cornerback room. This year, it is not a Band-Aid, it is stitches. Taron Arnold, Ennis Rakestraw, they improved their secondary. And at this point in time, I don't want to call James Houston and Marcus Davenport a Band-Aid, although we thought they could have done a little better at the edge position. I think James Houston can be very productive. I think he has that type of potential. And I think Davenport, if healthy, and I went through this yesterday when I talked about what I expect from Davenport and how we should all temper expectations. I don't even know if he's a Band-Aid yet. I think he could be pretty productive for the Lions. And I think this defensive line as a whole, DJ Reader is definitely not a Band-Aid. So I think the Lions, and Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes specifically, learn from their mistakes. And I think Brad Holmes also learning from his mistakes because of one thing only, and that's last year betting on the defensive line, banking on who they had. Not only that, but at corner as well, but injuries. I mean, Emmanuel Mosley going down didn't help, but that defensive line, banking on Josh Pascal, banking on the group of guys they had, it just wasn't enough. And a Band-Aid, no disrespect, but Benito Jones was definitely a Band-Aid. That's what was his role last year. Just being someone who could play, could fill a role. But as time goes on, the Lions roster just continues to get better. And they had, I think, one of the best, if not the best, off seasons in the NFL. So no more Band-Aids. Now they're stitching up at least parts of this ball club that need to be stitched up. Points of concern. And things that we talk about often, which is getting after the quarterback. And Dan Campbell did also talk about that and shared his opinion. And it's something that, I saw on Twitter and I watched in the press conference, and I knew right away that this quote was going to be something that was shared immediately. And that was Dan Campbell essentially saying sacks aren't that big of a deal as long as you're getting pressures. And then he was asked, like, hey, the sack total, how much do you value that, getting a certain amount of sacks? And this was his reply: sacks aren't that big of a deal as long as you're getting pressures. And although and he also did say, I want to make sure I clarify that he would much rather get sacks. I think we can all agree that sacks they end drives. They change outcomes of games. Aaron Donald, basically solidified that Super Bowl win by getting after Joe Burrow and hitting him. So when I heard Dan say this, although I get what he was trying to say, and I do partially agree with what he's saying. I think pressures definitely matter. I don't want to say they don't matter. But as long as we all agree that sacks have to be the ultimate goal, getting after the quarterback, sacking the quarterback, that is a momentum changer. If you're able to get after, not just get after the quarterback, but get sacks. And you even go through, and I went through this in a video, I think about a week or two ago, and how comparing Super Bowl winners and what their sack totals that year were. And a lot of teams that get to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl, not just have great quarterback play, not just have great head coaches, great defenses, but along with those defenses, an elite pass rush. That's what matters with a defense to me the most, is getting after a quarterback. Helps your secondary. And of course, if you have a good secondary, it allows your more time for your guys up front to get after the quarterback. And they just get more time rushing the passer. But overall, you got to be top 5 in sacks. It has to be a realistic goal. Now, do they have the personnel to do so? We shall see. But that is something that all teams should strive for. I mean, the Eagles had a crazy amount of sacks the year they made the Super Bowl. And of course, we have Jalen Hurts playing at an MVP level. But getting after the quarterback and specifically sacking the quarterback, that matters so much. And that's probably my biggest question mark with this Lions team is, what does that pass rush look like? I mean, they improved it. I'm not saying they did it, but at least on paper, they did. Now let's see it come to fruition and let's see the numbers. And can they be top 10, top 5 in sacks? But I don't think Dan Campbell is off base with what he said. I'm not even arguing that. Pressures do matter. If you can affect the quarterback, make him force a throw, make a mistake, move in the pocket in a negative way, like he said, affect the quarterback in just a negative way, then yeah, it does matter. And we know Aiden Hutchinson is an absolute menace when it comes to pressuring the quarterback. He just didn't have anyone to help clean up plays. And hopefully Davenport can do that, because he also talked about that a little bit, is, having another guy on the other side of Aiden Hutchinson that can, just be there, ready to clean up a play. And it doesn't have to just be Davenport. It could be a Lee McNeil. So that's going to help. And I think they're going to have more sacks than they did the last 2 years. It's just inevitable, in my opinion. Another thing that Dan Campbell kind of went into here, and I want to make sure I pull up the clip, is he talked about Hendon Hooker and his development, because that is something that was being reported. He was struggling a little bit in OTAs, and Dan Campbell answered a question regarding Hendon Hooker and kind of what he looks like, how he towards the end versus from the very beginning when the reports were coming out that he was struggling. And here's Dan Campbell's answer on that.
I would say yesterday was good to see. There was some improvement yesterday that we were really been looking for, and you felt a little bit of, there's some development there. It was really good to see, man. Just some of his reads, some of the throws he made. So yeah, there's and look, it's hard to put a timeline on things, man. Every player grows at a different level, especially at that position, the quarterback position. Now we put a lot on those guys, and he's got a lot. And it's a reminder, this is his first spring. It's the first time he's been through spring. It'll be his first training camp. And so look, there again, you just need to see growth. And so yesterday it was good to see. I would say.
Yes. And again, as we all kind of predicted, there was going to be improvement. He is the backup quarterback. He should be. Nate Sudfeld is there, but my goodness, if you can't beat out Nate Sudfeld, maybe everyone was wrong, including myself. But I think he can. And you see the improvement. Dan Campbell mentioned it. It's his first true OTAs. It's his first time participating. It's his first time playing legitimate snaps, at least in OTA. I mean, last year he was just sitting out and watching. This year he has pads on. Or at least not pads on, but he's participating. And I'm curious how this story continues to progress as we get to training camp, because he has to be ready. Like Dan Campbell said in his last press conference, you just want to have confidence he can run this offense if anything happens to Jared Goff. Not saying that your season won't be completely over, because there's a high likelihood of that if Jared does go down for the season. But having someone that can win a game or just keep things afloat for a drive or 2 games, whatever it is, that's what the goal should be for Hendon Hooker. When Patrick Malarkey, the area scout of the Detroit Lions, went on talking sports with Schwartz talking sports, my apologies. But when he went on that podcast and he mentioned how Hendon Hooker, the offense he's coming from Tennessee to now the NFL, there's a lot of adjustments. And of course, this Lions offense is super complex. So there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. So his development is a storyline to pay attention to as we get closer to training camp. And I do have faith he can beat out Nate Sudfeld because, my gosh, that would be one of the most disappointing things this entire offseason if Nate Sudfeld's your backup quarterback. But regardless, he also talked about Ben Johnson and how he is primed to be a head coach. Same with Aaron Glenn, though. I mean, the whole coaching staff are just filled with guys that could be head coaches one day. And you're going to get a Dan Campbell head coaching tree. I promise you. It's just how it's trending with his ability to hire coaches and just with the Lions and where they are as an organization. They're winning. And with winning, you lose coaches. So you're in that tier of organizations now where teams are going to start pulling away your assistant coaches. And Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, what Dan Campbell talked about with those two is the continuity and how it's important because you have returning coaches. So when different situations present themselves, there is almost an unspoken unspoken agreements on certain things. For example, Dan Campbell wants something to look a certain way, and Ben just already knows it, right? Or Aaron Glenn already knows it. There's not a learning process for the assistants and the head coach to get on the same page, which I think benefits the Lions because once you get into big games, not much has to be said. There's already an understanding. They know each other so well, and I think that benefits the Lions. So that is a great thing. It's tremendous. Not a lot of organizations get that benefit of having the same coaches for years. And the Lions do have that. And not just, they're not great coaches. That's why they're here. No, they're great coaches, but they're still here. And Ben Johnson returning, and he's speaking to the media too. He mentioned how he wanted to hang out a little longer. He wants to wait for the right situation, which as you should in life, if you have leverage, you should use that leverage and make sure you get the best possible opportunity. And Ben Johnson, there will always be organizations waiting on him. It's up to him. Do I want to go to X, Y, or Z, whatever team? And he will be afforded that opportunity. Dan Campbell also mentioned Sam Laporta and how Sam's production last year, he hopes it doesn't put pressure on him to match that or increase that production this year. Now with JMO arriving and being more of a factor in the offense, or Amon-Ra potentially getting more targets, or Gibbs getting more targets in the passing game. And I do agree with that because production's not always, it doesn't always gradually increase. Everything is different. And I know for Sam Laporta to be one of the best tight ends as a rookie, we all just expect continued growth production-wise. And I think Sam Laporta has all the tools to be a 1,000-yard tight end. He does. But with JMO now being a big factor in this offense, he is definitely going to take targets away from somebody. Now, do I believe that Sam Laporta will be more involved in JMO? Yes. But one thing I did bring up when talking about JMO's production and what I projected 800 yards, and people are like, what? You're projecting only 800 yards? Because I believe that Sam Laporta would still be a big part of this offense. I think he's an 1,000-yard tight end. But I also did mention that if you have faith that JMO can get 1,000 plus, that you have to expect Sam Laporta to decrease his production a little bit, which is fair. If you want to go with that argument, I don't have an issue with it, whether I agree or not. But my thing was always Sam Laporta. He had 800, 900 yards last year. And I think this year there's already a more of a familiarity with the playbook, and him and Jared already have a rapport. So I think earlier he's going to put up good numbers rather than last year. So I think Sam Laporta will have the same production, if not more. But if JMO really does come out and shock everybody, and he's an 1,000-yard receiver, which would be amazing, by the way, then yes, the production's going to have to be taken away from someone. And I think it's going to be Sam Laporta. I don't think Amon-Ra will ever have his production. He's always going to be a 1,500-yard receiver. That's just who he is. It's his value to this offense, and it's who he is as a player. But I'm curious what you guys think about that with the Sam Laporta thing. Do you think he increases his production, or you think JMO rises and Sam kind of stays the same, or maybe a little bit less off his year? You're not going to get 3,000-yard receivers. You're just not. So, let's be realistic here. It's only happened a handful of times in NFL history, with especially 2,000-yard, potentially 1,000-yard backs. So, talking realistically, what do you guys think about that? he also did not name a specific position group that impressed, which I don't think is a huge deal. It's OTA, so you'll probably hear more about that in training camp. But what he did say is no one regressed, which is important. I am curious about the wide receiver position and the battles with Antoine and DPJ and Khalif Raymond, all these guys, and who rises, because I think DPJ can legitimately fill Josh Reynolds' role. So that was one storyline I am continuing to watch for the rest of this offseason. Another position group would have to be that defensive line group, which you can't see yet because they don't have pads on. So when pads get put on, that is something that I think all Lions fans should be locked into. What does this defensive line room look like? Who's shining? What does Broderick Martin look like? Davenport, so on and so forth. James Houston. There's a lot of different storylines to pay attention to. But I'll ask you guys, number one, what were some of your favorite takeaways from Dan Campbell's press conference? And number two, what are some storylines you guys are looking for the rest of the offseason? Don't forget to comment down below and like the video. It does support the channel, and I do really appreciate it. Subscribe as well if you are not subscribed already. I try to post these recap videos for every press conference, mostly Dan Campbell's, because he always says some important things that I think need to be discussed. Check out our live show, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. every single weekday. And until next time, I'll catch you guys.